Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sunny Shell on the Sunny Spot. And today we're going to be talking about intersex and what does it mean to be intersex. So I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, everybody. So today I want to first introduce student Dr. Ben. Hey.
Hi.
I'm so
I'm
glad to have you back on the show again.
so excited to be here. Last time I was on, my voice was a lot squeakier. So this is a welcome change. I'm student Dr. Ben. I am officially now a fourth year medical student. And yes, I have a channel on YouTube where I talk about biology and debunking medical myths. And I do talk a lot about reproductive embryology and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to be talking about this today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming back on. And we talked about it behind the scenes. We are going to have us an awesome show talking about reproduction and
Mhm.
embryology and all of that kind of good stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. Our next guest is Amy Newman. Hey, Amy.
What is up, y'all? Hello, I am Amy Newman. I am happy to be here. I am a skeptic, a atheist, and I am LGBTQ. And tonight we are going to have a fantastic discussion. I'm so happy to have Sunny and student Dr. Ben here. And I am excited to just get into the journey. But I also want to say, if you want more skeptical adventures, I also have a YouTube too. So
yes, tell us all about it.
there. Sure. So I consider myself a counter apologist, a comedian, and an atheist. I very much enjoy picking apart different types of apologetics, Dawa channels. If there's a rabbi that wants to talk out there, I'll talk to them too. I am interested in just sharpening our epistemological toolkit. I want to know why theists believe. And so, even though we sometimes get accused of being evangelical atheist, all I have to say to that is, yeah, you're probably right, because, well, it's the number one superstition in the world. So come join at youtube.com/Amy Newman. And my co-host, shout out to James W., who is an awesome gentleman.
Very cool. So I want to give you a little bit of time, student Dr. Ben, to tell us about your YouTube channel too, because
Yeah.
you have a great one. I love your channel.
Yeah, my channel is Student Dr. Ben, and I do a show every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, except I'm actually taking 3 weeks off, so we'll be back in July. But I have a show called Medical Myths. We debunk medical myths. We've talked about quantum healing. We've talked about crystals. We've talked about naturopaths. Like we've covered a whole lot of things on there. But I also do more lecture style content as well, talking about embryology or about. I've talked about abortion. I talk about all kinds of sciencey subjects. So that's where you can find me.
Very, very cool. Yes. Okay. So to get our topic started today, what I really want to start out with is terminology. I think that people really need to understand what it is that we're talking about so that they can engage appropriately. So, either one of you, you can just jump in. What do we mean when we say intersex?
So I'll give lay terminology, and then soon Dr. Ben could give details. So I would just like to separate just a few things, and we'll intersex will be the goal. But first, we'll just start with who you're attracted to. That is sexual orientation. That is gay, straight, bi. You can also be pansexual, asexual. There's all sorts of DLCs. But after that, you think about not who you're attracted to, but who are you? Are you feminine? Are you masculine? Are you somewhere in between? We all are born generally with biological sex of male and female, though there are, as we're getting to, asterisks, but that tends to be your gender. It is the roles that tend to be highly correlated with sex, but aren't, because there's really nothing genetic saying a dress is feminine. It's just that has been kind of the cultural and what one drifts towards or another. And so, and then finally, we have your genitals, and your genitals are its own thing. Most times, you go through, as a good time to bring up embryology, you go through development, and everything, to bring the rabbi back up, is kosher. But occasionally, things don't completely go right. And so I'm not even sure that's the right terminology, because it turns out okay if it works. But it's different than the normal. It's different than the two boxes that people think of. And so I think that would be a good starting point, and then for Lay, but then I'm handing it right over to Dr. Ben. Student.
So, at least from the biological side of it, we often think of sex as being male or female and related to anatomy, chromosomes, etc. The problem is we oftentimes lump all of these characteristics together into those boxes. However, there's actually multiple different characteristics that make up your sex, and we kind of agree within the scientific community that it is the combination of these characteristics that would assign you to a certain sex. So we have chromosomal sex, which refers to are you XX, XY, XXY, XYY, any number of these could be your chromosomal sex. And then you have your, so that would be your genotype. And then apart from that is your phenotype, so how you appear. And that's kind of broken down into two separate categories as well. So you have your external phenotype and your internal phenotype. So your anatomy on the outside, or your genitals, and your anatomy on the inside, or your gonads, your testes or ovaries or what have you, and the other tubes associated with those. So those are the same kind of category, but still broken down into two separate parts. And then you also have your hormonal sex, which is related to are you estrogen dominant or are you testosterone dominant? And the thing is, when you break it down into all of these categories of characteristics, for the majority of the population, they all agree. So the majority of people, if you are XY, you will also have male external anatomy, male internal anatomy, and be testosterone dominant. However, that's not the case for everybody. Not everybody has every component aligning. And we can get into some nitty-gritty with that. But if someone is XY, that does not necessarily mean that they have male genitalia. They might actually have female genitalia, or they might have both male and female genitalia at the same time, or they might have something in between that kind of resembles neither. And that's just dependent on multiple processes. So when we're talking about biological sex, it's already messy. And so when we're talking about intersex, and I know this is, Amy can probably help with this terminology as well. I know a lot of people within the LGBTQ community accept intersex as a term they want to use. I also hear, at least in the medical field, when we're describing it clinically, we'll say something like differences in sexual development, which is a way we've steered away from the antiquated terminology of disorders of sexual development, because they used to be classified as disorders. And so what we're seeing now is we're learning that these aren't disorders. It's a variation of normal. And so different people just fall along with different variations of normal. And so I think that's where the terminology is coming in. I don't know what Amy thinks about that.
Sure. So I think that intersex works. I think that also trying to say that it's just that genitals develop in different ways, I also think that is acceptable and maybe be where the future is. I think that the most important thing is just, I guess, what we're doing here is trying to bring people awareness to a lot of this, because I know that especially from people that oppose us, the words and the terminology just goes everywhere. And yeah, but I agree.
Okay, so someone in the chat earlier had put, let me see if I can find it. They said, I think it should be called intergender. So when I first saw this, I thought, oh, that's interesting. However, is that actually encompassing the discussion, or is it potentially capturing one side of it? Because you have the sex and you have the gender and you have it's almost like there's just a big, not even a spectrum, because a spectrum is linear. So it almost seems like it's,
well, I will say, so there is a spectrum to being intersex, but I would still say it's still with the three categories that we kind of laid out, because it's who you're attracted to, your role, and your genitals. And so, in fact, what I would say is it's how many, I hate to say levels, but I'll give an example. So I'm fairly sure I have XY chromosomes, and yet I have what is called a hypostadius, which I think I will eventually, in a second, turn back over. But I was told this early on in my life, and it meant nothing to me because I had never seen anyone else's genitals. And so when they said that, I'm like, cool, that's just what it is. And so it took way into like my early 20s until it was like, wow, you have a hole on the top of your penis. Like, is that where most people have, like, guys have a hole? And so and in a second, maybe I'll get into details, and I'll also once again about to hand it over. But I have physiological differences, especially on the head. And I think a hypostadius can be, I almost break that into three categories, because it could be the head, the shaft, and the balls, of how much. And with that said, I'm putting that on the table and handing it back over to Stu Dr. Ben.
Yeah, that is correct. You can have basically the urethral meatus, or the hole that pee comes out of. It's supposed to be at the tip of the penis, but when the penis is forming in utero, it actually starts off. Everybody starts off in an intermediate type stage within our sexual development. And so certain structures actually have consult my diagram, making sure I got these. So you have that's gonna be hard to explain this without having the pictures. But anyway, you
can share your screen
folds,
if you want to.
You have certain folds that are going to the same folds that are going to become the penis and the scrotum are the same ones that become the labia, etc. So they start off separate, and they need to fold over, and they create a space in the middle, which becomes the urethral meatus. And so if you have a difference in how things fold and attach, that's where you get differences in where the hole goes. And so for certain people, the hole ends up like before it reaches the end of the penis. And so that's where you get a hypospadias. So you can also get something called an epispadias, which is on the top, although that's more rare. And I think they don't often do as much with it because it's not as much of an infection risk. But something with hypospadias is that it predisposes people to UTIs. So it's the one case where we actually do genital surgeries on children. But otherwise, we really don't. But I mean, there's my little nuggets of info on that. But
Now that is fascinating, and I will tell you as someone who has had UTIs, they suck. So if there's anything that gives someone more of a chance for UTIs, I am so sorry. That's just awful. They're
dangerous.
Yes.
As a baby, you're not ready to handle something like that. So it's something that generally, and it depends on the severity as well. Like depending on where it is positioned, could change the risk factors. But yeah, it's interesting that Amy is talking about her experience with, because we all, I mean, for at least a good part of our lives, only know of our own bodies and don't really know what else is out there. And I think this is an important reason why we need to have conversations like this, because of course, if you only know what you've seen on yourself and what you've seen in pictures, of course, it's going to be difficult for you to imagine that anything could exist outside of what you've already seen before.
Yeah.
It's incredulity. Can't know what you don't know.
Yeah, I'm curious from both of you guys what you think. We have so many new laws that are coming into place that are absolutely ridiculous laws based out of a lack of awareness, a lack of science, and not even wanting to know what the science is. Yes, please go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to say, because I want to, before I insult this country, I just want to say I've actually been very proud of Western societies in general across the world. We've actually been trending in the right direction. So we're having a little bit of a reactionary pushback after so many grounds that I'm actually very proud. And I feel like it has become a much more a welcoming society, even from just 10 years ago, a dramatic shift. And so I'm very proud. And yet, with that said, there is a bunch of, I don't know what to call them. I joke that, they create their own problems. They create their own first world problem. I don't know what the exact thing is, but none of the issues, and not to get too spicy, but it's the same with CRT, transgender children, all of these issues. Think about it. They're all just made up for fear. Okay.
Right.
These are not happening. I can just alleviate all fears. Teachers are teaching exactly what they're being paid to be taught. And that is it. If they're going out of their way, it's just to be an awesome teacher, to just do extracurricular activities. And so these types of issues are generally taught in much higher grade levels. And so, your children cannot be groomed to be gay. However, they can be groomed to be religious. And with that,
absolutely. My concern is you were talking about how this is the one instance when we do medical surgery on or medical, like there's anything other than medical surgery. I don't know why I said medical surgery. When we do surgery on the genitals of babies because of this risk, my concern is with the laws that are coming out, which is absolutely a reactionary push from the uber religious right, because they've seen so much progress. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Amy. But we are also with that we have our political leaders have the ability to pass these laws that are extremely damaging.
Can I just say one other thing? This is my last rant on politics.
No, go ahead.
I'm an independent. I'm an independent. I love everything. But I've heard the word activist judges for so long. All these accusations, you all try to put activist judges in the court. Let me tell you what has been happening the past few years.
Yes.
Use that word. Just fill in that blank there. And it pisses me off.
Yeah. Well, we've been so focused on so many other things that we haven't seen what has happened. And really right-wing activist judges from local courts all the way up to our Supreme Court have been pushed in unprecedented numbers in the last 5 years. So yeah, absolutely. Which makes me nervous about this thing. When you're talking about babies who have a higher risk of having UTIs, which is extremely dangerous, have you seen anything that that is dangerous in that aspect? Because we've seen things about, in Texas, I think it was Texas or Florida, one of those two crazy places that, I think it was Texas, that if you did anything that had to do with transgender, then, you had CPS coming after you, Child Protective Services coming after you. I mean, people are actually in real world, in real life, people are being, investigated as unfit parents because they are supportive of their LGBTQIA plus children. And so this, I feel, can easily be brought into that discussion. And if you end up having a child who needs to have the surgery, it may end up being looked at in that same light. From the medical community, is there a concern about that?
So actually, our concern is kind of opposite, because what we saw previously, and the whole medical community is heading in a pretty positive direction with regard to bodily autonomy for children. And I think if people want to regress, they're actually going to be in favor of more surgeries for children, because what we used to do was you'd have a baby who was born with ambiguous genitalia, and the doctor and the parents would talk and they'd say, okay, which box do you want your kid to fit into? And then they do the surgery right there on the child, so that they can more easily be assigned to a binary sex. So I think if we are going to be heading backwards, I think more surgeries are going to happen for children. Whereas what the medical community wants to do is we've steered away from that and have started saying, we're going to talk with the parents and we're going to explain that it's more beneficial to wait until the child can consent to a procedure. Wait and see what the child wants to do, because it's their body. And some people are very happy with their bodies the way that they are, even if they don't fit into a binary sex. And other people do want to be assigned to a binary sex, and they should be able to choose what direction they go if they want that surgery. So that's where we're trying to go, because for any of these, there are, again, some exceptions, like one that we talked about. Another one, which really wouldn't be a surgical therapy, but would be a medication therapy, is for a congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is actually a type of difference in sexual development that does not come from your sex chromosomes or your sex anatomy at all. It comes from your adrenal glands. So if you have a disrupted enzyme in your adrenal gland to where you can't produce aldosterone or cortisol, you're going to produce an incredibly high amount of testosterone. And so it's a hormone difference that will cause an XX baby to appear masculine. And the only reason why we intervene in that case, it's not for cosmetics. It's not to make them seem binary. It's because of the fact that they cannot produce aldosterone or cortisol. And so they have dehydration issues and they have issues with infections. So that's the reason why we would give them a steroid. They'd be chronically on steroids for their whole life because of this. But in terms of differences in sexual development that are cosmetic only, which many of them are, we don't and we shouldn't intervene until the child can consent. So.
Excellent. Well, we have right along this line, we have a question from the audience that I want to go ahead and grab. So Air, I hope I'm saying that right. If I'm not, please correct me. Air asked, how do the hormones work with intersex? Does the body produce more of one than another? And do the surgeries cause that to change?
So this is really complex, and it depends on what type of difference they have. Because for some of them, let's take somebody who has ovotestes. You might be having equal amounts of both estrogen and testosterone, and that could factor in then with which one you produce more of. But some of them aren't even related to the testosterone or estrogen at all. If you have, everyone, but especially people with an XY chromosome and the SRY gene, produce high amounts of 5-alpha reductase, which is an enzyme that converts testosterone to DHT. And DHT is just a very strong form of testosterone. But some people have a deficiency or an absence of 5-alpha reductase. So what happens in this case, so DHT is required to make external male anatomy. So if you follow the pathway, you produce testes, so you are able to produce testosterone. So you can grow internal male genitalia because that requires testosterone only, but you cannot produce DHT, so you don't produce male external genitalia. So it really depends, like the hormones matter, but it's going to be very different based on which hormones you have, which receptors you have that work, which enzymes you have that work, and then how this cascade works, because you also have inhibition of other structures. So it's very complicated. And the surgeries wouldn't cause the hormones to change, but it could, they would essentially cause an irreversible like change in anatomy to where the hormones aren't going to matter as much. But yeah, that's a very loaded topic. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that if that comes up, because I know that was kind of dense.
And I just want to pick up a point that Ben brought up, which was I have come to appreciate, I wouldn't change my genitals. I like the fact that I am intersex. I like the fact that I jokingly say I have Amy genitals because, they're my own. And so I am glad that my parents, they picked a gender. And so that's why I'm transgender, because they were like, well, there's something wrong. What should we do? My parents, even though they're very science-based, I think they wouldn't want a surgery if they didn't have to. And I'm very, very, if I could brag about one thing tonight, okay, it's that I have 2 Jewish parents, male genitalia, and I was not circumcised. Because and this I don't know if this is weird or not. There is also, I guess, a spectrum of foreskin. I was born with half of my foreskin, and so they were like, I guess it's cut already. and they just rolled with it.
God did it for you, right?
There you go. They did fast delivery. And so, yeah. So there could be, you could, I think, if you want, like Ben was saying, actually decide to want surgery. I think you could like it. I think both things are amazing and awesome, and I support both.
That brought up a question, and you do not have to answer this. First of all, I want to say that you can say, I don't want to answer that. But with your parents choosing, what they felt was the best gender for you, are they supportive of you being transgender?
So I'll say now they are the biggest supporters of transgender rights out there. At the time, they were not so thrilled. And that is what I think many parents, maybe now it's changing, but I remember my mom almost falling down the stairs. I think she was being overly dramatic when we told my dad, my brother, I was very scared to tell and things like that. It was just very awkward when you're trying to tell the guys. And so, but got over it. Life continues. You get, my joke has always been, it's character selection. So you're really just figuring out who you are and setting everything right. And then once that gets set, I started to do other things and started to really, I think, excel. And so I think my parents saw that, my family saw that. And so right now, like I said, I think my mom especially, but my dad too. I think my dad, they are, like I said, the biggest supporters out there. It becomes a new normal. I forget which
Right.
TV show I'm stealing that from, but
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize that people from an earlier generation do have a harder time. This is new to them. Life was a certain way, and now it's not that way anymore. And trying to come to terms with that can be a difficult thing. I think religion has a big role to play in that. If you are indoctrinated that something is evil or sinful in nature and that it's a choice, that's a very hard thing to overcome. But even aside from that,
and if I could just pause you, you are
yeah,
basically on that thing. You just have to walk them through how making that sort of choice would be even possible. That is not
right.
actually how you make decisions. But
And
yes,
I think, Ben, you have a great way of doing that because you have the biological side. The problem is that right now we have a lot of people who don't believe in science, that don't believe in medicine, and that can be difficult in and of itself. But if you take all of that out of the equation and you just have someone from a different generation, I think that, I mean, like we were saying beforehand, I'm not ashamed to say this. I am almost 50. I'm getting close, a couple years. And I told you guys behind the scenes that it was difficult for me. I've always wanted to be progressive, and I've had a compassionate nature in my heart. I've always been that way. So I've wanted to be accepting, and I've wanted to learn. That's the difference. A lot of people from
absolutely.
my generation have not had that same desire to want to know and learn and grow. They get stuck in their own ways, regardless of um, the religiosity or politics or anything else. It's just this is how it was. Why are we changing? And that's from my generation. You get back even further, I mean, I was coming of age when in the 80s. You have people who are coming of age in the 60s and the 70s, and they have an even harder time. I think it's important to recognize that not everybody is trying to necessarily be Karens or Chads. They are honestly just having a difficult time, and to be understanding of that as long as they're willing to learn. I think that's the biggest thing. If you can say, I want to learn, that's am I making sense with that?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. And I will just a quick statement. I think intent matters because that changes all of the outcomes. There's a very big difference. Hate to say ignorance and arrogance because it's not really a true dichotomy, but you can work with people that want to learn. It's much harder with people who have learned bad information, disinformation, because you almost have to undo things. You have to work backwards.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so getting away from that topic and back back to our main topic. One thing I would really love to know is how can people who are not necessarily intersex, how can we be supportive to the intersex community? What are ways that we can not just be supportive ourselves, but how can we create a better future for you? What do you need from us, if that makes sense?
I would say part of what we're doing right now, which is education. I feel like that's one of the most important steps that could be done. And then being an ally. And being an ally just means doing what is right when the moment comes. When someone is being an a-hole to an LGBTQI person, stand up for them. do what's right, and I'll hand it off to student Dr. Ben.
I mean, this isn't for me to say because I'm not part of this community.
So I guess and the other thing, I guess, would just be not to drill on a hammer. But, you know, I only have one tool. And let me tell you, combat religion, okay? Because a lot of this misinformation comes from religion. The good book says that 2 gay people should be put to death. He made a meteor fall just to make sure of that, or however he destroyed the lovely ocean spot. He said no cross-dressing or some type of wear, no men, women's clothing, yada, yada, yada. So they quote that, and they basically, when it comes to being intersex, it is very black and white thinking, because God made male and female. And God doesn't make mistakes. And yet, here I sit. It turns out that not just who you're attracted to, not just your role in society, but your genitals can be a spectrum in a multitude of ways. Like student Dr. Ben was saying, it can happen physiologically on the inside and out. It can happen hormonally. It can happen in a multitude of ways. And so I guess education, an ally, and fight religion. That would be my 3 suggestions.
Well, and just something else is that a lot of people who are intersex don't even know that they are. It's not always so
Absolutely.
obvious. Like the primary situation where you'd be diagnosed with something like Klinefelter, which is XXY chromosomes. So these are people who are typically assigned male. They often grow up and are undiagnosed until they experience trouble with fertility. And so it can be invisible for a lot of people. So it's not always so obvious. And it's something that we like, and this is somebody who's not part of the community, but just like before you're so ready to jump on somebody for like, oh, but you look this way, like you can't be intersex, or you can't have this experience because you don't meet these criteria, whatever. You don't know. So you can listen to people, stay out of their business. Like if, and also, I mean, this is something, at least from my perspective being trans, like people don't owe you an explanation for who they are or their bodies or anything.
Right.
Like you can, and be careful when asking your friends questions about this, because they are not there to just talk about this all the time. They might not be comfortable talking about it. It might be emotionally difficult for them to talk about it. So if you want to ask questions, make sure that you are getting consent from anybody that you are asking questions to, because they don't have to answer. But just respect people's boundaries, respect. And if people say that they want to answer your questions, go for it. But even if they've said in the past that they want to answer a question, does not mean that they're ready to in that moment. So always ask for consent each time. And like, especially if there's something more difficult like genitals, be sure that they are consenting to talking about genitals. And don't be weird about it.
Yeah, that is so true. Go ahead, Amy.
No, 100%. But I just want to bounce off what student Dr. Ben said, is that if I was not bisexual or pansexual, there's a chance, not 100%, that it may not have clicked that I really was intersex, because I was told I had a hypostatus, I was told all these things, but yet I never had a comparison really up close. And so I can imagine that if you don't especially are attracted to the other gender and you're not hanging down there a lot, there's a chance you could go your whole life without really ever knowing. Just hearing the medical diagnosis, maybe just understanding on a lay person's, but really not, and just living life. Everything else was just going by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also want to piggyback on what you just said, Ben, because I've had friends of mine who have, and it's not just trans or intersex or anything else, it could be about race, but people who feel like they suddenly have to be the spokesperson for whatever category it is. It is never their job to inform you, to teach you how to be a better person. You can talk to your medical provider if they are willing to talk to them. You can Google. That's the great thing about Google. Just make sure you're looking at proper sources. You have to know how to figure out sourcing. But it is nobody's business to inform you or teach you or help you to be a better person. So when you said that, I had all these friends back in my head going, yes, yes, yes. That's so true. We have another question from the audience really quickly. Does being intersex predispose a person to health issues or medical conditions, maybe not related to genitals? That's a great question, Aaron. Thank you.
It depends. It depends on the situation. Like I was mentioning, congenital adrenal hyperplasia is one that does give you difficulties with hydration and with infections. So that's definitely one. But also certain things with and this is kind of related to genitals, but where I'm going with it is that if you have something like I had mentioned where the folds have to close at a midline point, you have other parts of your body that also need to wrap around and close at a midline point, such as your abdomen. The heart does similar twisty turny things. So certain types of differences in sexual development can predispose people to having those other kinds of things happen. Namely for people with Turner syndrome, which is people who are X, just one X chromosome. They often have issues with the aorta. So it's something where we might not intervene with their genitals, but I would need to make sure that this person does not have an issue with their heart or don't have an issue with their abdomen or their intestines or something like that. But yeah, so it really depends on the individual. And this is where we need to treat people kind of as they are with the organs that they have and the way that they're presenting, instead of assuming all these people are intersex, their bodies are going to work the same way, because they absolutely don't.
Absolutely. And frankly, all of us can be predisposed to certain medical issues across the spectrum. Just for instance, women have a higher chance of being diagnosed with a thyroid disorder than men, but men do get that sometimes too. So that can happen with anyone who's born. So I do have a graph that I wanted to share really quickly. Let me see if I can pull it up. And this is actually from Cindy Plaza. She made a spectrum of gender and biological sex and all of that I thought was really interesting. And I wanted to get y'all's perspective on this. And thank you, Cindy Plaza. I want to give you all the credit. So when you look at this, what is your initial reaction to this? First, we'll start from a layman's perspective. Amy, how do you feel about the way that, because remember I said earlier, the spectrum didn't feel right. This feels a little bit better to me, but how do you feel about this?
I mean, I think it could work. It looks like it's trying to determine many of the factors that we were talking, and it almost looks like, I hate to say it's a multi-spectrum graph, but that's what it looks kind of like. And so, I mean, I'd be open for that. I think I'll hand it really over to the medical community.
Well, I mean, I definitely think that this is it's great for approaching it from a social side. I think it's really helpful in understanding the differences between all of these subjects because they're all very different categories of traits. So definitely, like when talking to people about where you fit on these is great. I think everyone should take something like this for themselves and see where they fit, because I think a lot of people aren't as binary in all of these areas as they think that they are. In terms of like from the medical side, of course, I would want like some more detail, but I mean that's not super relevant. I think this is absolutely from a social side pretty great image.
Yeah, the thing I like about it is you had talked about, attraction, biological sex, gender, all of those different things, not just gender identity, but gender expression. And I really like how this has kind of all of those things incorporated. I would love to know more about some of the what the icons mean, that the letters mean, those type of things. But I really thought it was an interesting tool, at least to get someone talking about it. At the very least, bringing up the conversation in a different way, if that makes sense. All right, so I just wanted to bring that in really quickly. So when we're talking about intersex, we've talked about the terminology. We've talked about how it can how it affects our daily lives, the people around us, how they interact with us, the biology of it versus the layman kind of terms with it. What I would love to know from both of you is, what do you think that the next step should be in our conversations when it comes to this? Where should we go from here?
Well, I think we are going to have to, unfortunately, play defense for a little while. There is going to be numerous attacks on basically all of the rights that we gained. And so I would just remind people to stay vigilant. It's become, there's a weird trend. I would say stay woke, but apparently that's an insult now. But that's, from the 60s, it meant stay politically awake. So I would say, if you don't want more triggering words, I'm telling you to stay politically awake. Because, and I'll paint with as thin a brush as possible. It's the fundamentalist religious people. Your hippie dippy religious person probably isn't coming after transgender people, intersex people, and the entire community. But nonetheless, if we want to move forward, I would like to ensure that the gains that we have gained stay there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think, Ben?
Yes, I definitely agree with all of that. And I think from the medical front, we need to, number one, the medical community needs to learn how to communicate better because we're really bad at that. But I think that education is a great step forward in everything. I guess I think people, like, of course, you have those people who want to be bigots just for the sake of being bigots. But I think for the most part, people believe what they're doing is the right thing with the information that they have. So the thing is then, how do we get them the correct information so that they can make better decisions about it? And I think learning about embryology is helpful. Learning about social issues and sociology is helpful. Learning about history is helpful. Learning about all of these subjects is going to be helpful to this conversation. And so I think my part of this conversation, at least, is bringing embryology to the table. And that's actually why I started my channel, was to talk about this issue, because I thought if people understood what an embryo goes through to develop these traits, then we can think differently about it. I sat in my I didn't take embryology until medical school. So this information is not as accessible as it needs to be. And I remember sitting through that class And just every day it was like, wow, that's how this works. Like, it's not anything that's intuitive. So I think education and information is the way to combat it. So if we take this process and we show people this is what happens, and those people who genuinely want to help and want to have the truth and want to engage properly about it can. And I think that information is not as accessible as it needs to be.
And I think at this point, it's extremely important to recognize that we have a very well organized anti-education coalition that is really trying to undermine public education as a whole, give more public funding to private religious schools, and undermine education as a whole. I mean, if we cannot even understand that we don't live on a flat Earth, I mean, we've gone so we have gone so far backwards that exactly. And I think, like Amy said, you said earlier, Amy, that we have made great strides. You're absolutely right. And it's important to understand that. And this may be kind of the death throes of a dying cult in a sense. However,
I hope so.
The problem is that they have a lot of power. They have a lot of power, and they have used religion as a method of holding on and exacerbating that power to the point where it's going to be very, very difficult for a majority even to counter that.
They play the ground game. That's why we need people to wake up, because they have basically been saying, look, we're going to slowly but surely get people in power on, like you were saying, both the local level and apparently the Supreme Court. And thank you so much, Theo. Sending love. And also, if I could just bring up another triggering thing, a phrase we often get is, they don't accept biology. They just don't. And yet, my, oh my, it's so funny that it seems the biologists, the people that study embryology, well, it's generally that community which sides with us. It takes these sorts of questions into consideration in academia, empirically. And so what I have found, surprise, surprise projection, they don't understand biology. So that would probably go a long way.
And can I shill something really quick going along with next steps and continuing this conversation?
Absolutely.
So after this stream tonight, and this happens every Monday, but Uncle Beck has a show called Oxic Transculinity, talking about mostly trans issues, but we end up talking about all kinds of LGBTQ issues. So definitely stop by after this show if you have more questions or want to get in on that.
Oh, that's perfect. Absolutely. Anything that we can do to support other people who are doing the hard work, I think that's fantastic. We just have a few minutes, so I wanted to give you guys kind of your your final word on the subject, so to speak. And I would love to start with Amy.
Well, I just want to thank everyone. I just want to, first of all, thank Sunny, student Dr. Ben, but also Wes and Shane, and all my non-believers and skeptic community out there. Thank you so much for the love and support. I would not trade this community for any other. First of all, because, we don't have holy wars. So, it's the little things that matter. But I do want to thank you for having me on this episode. It is important for the LGBTQI community to help educate their peers out there. And so I think that this is important. I will reiterate that being an ally is important, and you don't have to use any fancy words. Doing the right thing. If you do the right thing, to your LGBTQI brothers, sisters, and everything in between, you will actually be doing them a service. Woohoo! What's up, Happy Humanist? And as well as fighting fundamentalist religion, which creates unavoidable boxes in which there is no escaping, apparently, even biology. And so I just want to send all the love out there. You can find me. I am Amy Newman. You can find me on the YouTubes, the Twitches, and the streams. I want to send love to James W., my host out there. We do a whole bunch of skeptic and atheist content, even a skeptic Bible study. And yeah, I just want to send love into the interwebs. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to student Dr. Ben, who I am so glad was here to explain the technical terminology tonight.
All right,
Thanks.
Dr. Ben.
Thanks for having me on. I always love an opportunity to talk about embryology. It is a nerdy fascination of mine. And just kind of echoing everything that Amy had just said, like keep these conversations happening. And I like to say, stay curious, because I think approaching these conversations with curiosity and a desire to learn is how we're all going to move forward, because there's no way you can know everything about everything. And so you're going to learn something from everybody you're in the room with. And if you do want to learn more about the nitty-gritty embryology side, I have videos on my channel about this whole sexual differentiation process. And then I'm starting a whole series, since I'm going to be gone for a few weeks, but I have scheduled videos, and it's going to be a long series about the whole process of embryology from fertilization to the end of pregnancy. So if you're wanting all of this kind of in-depth information, you can find it on my channel, which is Student Dr. Ben. It's this name here. And thanks, everybody. Definitely go make sure that you watch Uncle Beck tonight if you have more questions.
Thank you both so much. I think this was such an important topic. I want to thank you, student Dr. Ben. You are always phenomenal, and I really want to plug your channel, because I learn something every time that I watch, and you do a phenomenal job. And thank you so much. Amy, I am so glad that I got to meet you. You are fantastic.
Woo-hoo.
I love your energy. I love your props. I love everything about you. You're fantastic. So I've got to have you back on again. You're awesome.
Thank you so very much. And I just want to reiterate that you should be checking out both Beck and student Dr. Ben's channels. And then I was so happy to meet you, Shani. You were amazing, a fantastic and kind host. And like you were saying, and once again, I forget who I'm taking this from, but no one who is curious is dumb.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. It's okay to not know. It's not wanting to know that's the problem.
In fact, it's the skeptic's mantra. I sometimes find religious people say, when you say, I don't know, they're like, oh, how can you be comfortable? Well, I don't know is actually the first step to actually knowing.
Absolutely.
Instead of just filling in whatever we want, like a dude is watching us 24/7, 365 and cares what we stick up our butt.
I love it. That is the best final word ever. Love it. So for all of you, if you have really enjoyed this content, I want you to like this. I want you to subscribe. I want you to share it, hit the bell, do all that awesome stuff. If you really want to help, try being a Patreon, because that would be flipping fantastic. We love our Patreons. We also have other shows, so I've looked them up. So on the 1st, we have Christian Reconstruction with Dr. Julie Ingersoll, and that is on which one is that one? I think that one's on the Secular Soapbox. And then we have Women of the Bible on Saturday with Deborah Grace and Apostate Ashley. Check that out. Jena's the host of that one. It's flipping fantastic. I love Jena. She's so awesome. So be sure and check out those shows. I also want to thank those who are working so hard behind the scenes. We have Wes, Phil, Kat, Jena, and our newest Aaron and Shane, who are in charge of kind of getting all of our wonderful guests on, and they did a fantastic job this time. That's so awesome. I also want to thank all of you who are watching, because this is Memorial Day. The three of us came on. I've been out in the woods all day, so I have no makeup. I have done nothing to myself. I've been out hiking. I'm sweaty and hot, So actually, I probably should have said that. It sounded really bad. I have been out hiking, so I have gotten sweaty. And I just thought, you know what? I'm not going to put makeup on because I've been out working in the woods and having a
Because you're
good
like,
time.
I don't want it to drip all over my face.
And when I first came back, my face was like a big red beet. So I actually look a little bit better now. But thank you guys all for coming and watching us during a holiday. I think that's great. So all of you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week. And remember, in the meantime, to always think critically. Have a good night, everybody.